After a long 38 days on the road, we have finally made it home from the E34's cross-country road trip journey. 38 days, over 7,000 miles, 15 states. I can't even begin to explain how much fun I had on this trip. I have a board here of things I want to talk about in this video, a few topics overviewing the trip. So we're going to talk about the status report on the car. We're going to look at the exterior and the interior. What happened to the car, like this, what, basically the condition, like, you know, rock chips, etc. Then we're going to talk about what the car did well, what I enjoyed, what I'm proud of. Then we're going to talk about what it did poorly, what I was disappointed with. And then we're going to go over all the things I packed and talk about what I regret bringing versus what I'm glad I had. Spoiler alert, I brought too much, and a lot of you hinted at that in the other video. Was it reliable, and the reliability factor, you know, would I do it again, what you guys need to know if you're going to do something like this. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the total costs to get this car from here across the country. Not the build costs, I can do that in a different video. This is going to be basically, if you want to do what I did and leave from the Midwest and do an entire loop out west and back, how much the gas is going to cost you, food, lodging here and there. My trip will obviously be different than your trip. You know, I had family and friends, places, so I didn't have to spend a lot of money on lodging. If you have to spend money on lodging every night, it's going to be outrageously expensive. But that's what we'll get to at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look around the car. I'll show you guys some things, and then we'll sit down and have a good old conversation. Okay, so in terms of the condition of the car and how we made it back, it's filthy because I had to drive through a bunch of rainstorms, but sitting in 100-degree California sun, Nevada sun, I had my sunshade, the BMW Genuine, but as far as the paint goes, no paint faded, nothing like that. I had the car pretty protected. I have noticed though that like the rubber, like the rear bumper has absolutely cracked in multiple spots. That was never cracked before. So the sun did a number on that. Otherwise, no issues with the sun or paint fade, which is good. I didn't really expect it to. It was not like I was there for 10 years. But then the next major thing that people worry about with road trips is rock chips. And I still have to clean the car, but I will say that I'm pretty confident that almost every rock chip that's on this hood is from trips prior, because most of them you could see are kind of like rusted or like flash rusted because they've been there for a while with bare metal. There isn't all that many fresh little rock chips, maybe a few here and there, but nothing gnarly. I'm really cautious about how close I follow to people and semis, etc. So like this car was already pretty bad with rock chips, but I don't notice anything worse. And then one of the other things you'll notice in the front end that I talked about in the last video is that. So that is frustrating. The car made it the whole way up until Iowa, where a semi-truck cut me off and roasted a tire and flung a tire at me. The bumper and everything's intact, no damage, except my fog light got a little bit badly bruised. It didn't fall out, so I still have it. I don't know why this car is locked. So here's the trim piece. It's fine, it's just covered in bugs. I just took this out just in case. The fog light didn't crack, which is amazing, but it literally split. So this is the back bulb housing, and then it obviously goes in there and bolts up. All four of the mounts broke, so it's kind of destroyed. That's the only front end damage that occurred to this car along the trip, from a stupid semi-truck driver who blew out a tire. But other than that, and this will mainly get into in the negatives of the car, I did mess up both my fenders pretty badly. Now this isn't really an issue with the road trip. This is an issue with the way I set up the car, the lack of camber and just how low I put it in tire sizes. So I mean, if you're riding a stock height car, you'll never have to worry about this. If you have sufficient camber, you'll never have to worry about this. So this I can't really talk about for like things to worry about on a road trip, because that's entirely my fault. But otherwise, all over the body, I don't think we got any new dents, parking, you know, in public places. Nothing really major happened outside. No windshield trim flew off, which a lot of people happen on these cars, which is interesting. As for the interior, the California heat did delaminate my door cards a little bit. This was never like this before, so that sucks. The rears were, of course, already on their way out, and I don't know if these really got any worse, so early model door card things. Otherwise, the packed back seat, no wear to the seats or anything like that. Driver's seat. I mean, I'm a lightweight guy. I didn't really wear out the driver's seat. I took out the shifts around already because how annoying it was. But otherwise, the interior, nothing really wore in here, so not much to talk about there. Now we get into what this car did good on this trip. This car far surpassed every expectation I had. This thing cruised between 80 and 100 on the highway for hours on end. I mean, I was doing 10-hour stretches, not a single hiccup, not a single, noise or this or that. The stock exhaust was amazing. It was quiet, it was comfortable. I mean, it is amazing how much I probably spent 70 hours collective, if not more, driving this car, and it never once was like uncomfortable. The seats, my back never hurt. The seats kept me comfortable. The interior, there's no random noises, and part of this is because it's a nice low mileage car, but also E34s in general are pretty solid. No rattles or things like that. The stock sound system was fantastic. Not really much bass, but most people don't really care about that. I don't know if you care about bass or not. But for listening to music the entirety of the drive, right? 7,000 miles of music, I was never once not happy with the sound system, which is rare. Usually the sound system in these cars blow out and are really horrible, but this sound system sounded fantastic the whole way. Really happy with the sound system, really happy with the comfort of the interior. The suspension ride quality was amazing, and this is on BCs but with really soft spring rates. But man, it would hit bumps and it felt like stock suspension. It was very comfortable and I cannot complain about it. It drove really nicely in a straight line and even in corners, but I'm going to leave that for the next category because it didn't feel quite as good as I would have liked it to. And I have a few reasons for that, which I'll get into when we talk about things that I wasn't happy with. But otherwise, going through mountains and this and that, it felt great. It felt like a comfortable stock car, like it felt like a tourer like what these are. Okay, and now we're going to get into what it did poorly, what I was disappointed with. Now, I can say for a fact the thing I am most disappointed in with this car is the fact that I messed up my front fenders because of the front suspension setup on this car. BCs will usually let you get about -3 front camber. I don't know if these are welded wrong from the previous owner or what, but they are for some reason maxed at -1.5, which is just not enough front camber for a car that is lowered like this. So I'm disappointed with that because first off, because of this, everything out west, like every parking lot is raised above the ground, so you're always going in angled like driveways. And when the car's not cambered like this and you have a kind of a poking wheel, the tire just catches the fenders and it just destroyed my fenders. And I'm so annoyed with that. And not only that, you could obviously say that's my fault, but aside from what it did cosmetically, because I wanted a low car, there's a little dent right there, it really affected the handling of this car. Like when I was driving, like curves and stuff, trying to hit like, high speed corners and stuff, it did good, but it didn't feel like great. Like if you hop in Alan's car, which is more cambered out in the front, it just feels way more planted. I don't know if it's a matter of the fact that it's on 18s with 40 Pros and it kind of creates a floaty feeling, or if it's the no front camber. Obviously front camber gives you better like front turning stability and like control. So I think that's kind of what it is, mixed with the big wheels. But something about the front of this car felt kind of off the whole trip. And then there's to mention the control arms that failed prematurely, the Mile HD. I don't know if I talked about the brand when I did it, and I talked about how, whatever their lifetime warranty, I don't care. Which is true, and I can just get a new set, but that's disappointing that they failed right away. But that's not really the car's fault, that's the manufacturer's fault, so I can't really talk on that much. But between those kind of messing up, the 55-mile-an-hour shake kept coming back. I could not get rid of it. The front end just felt floaty, man. The car felt scary to really push. And I didn't feel like it should have felt that way because my turbo car has been very fun to drive in the corners and stuff, and I've never even thought twice about it. These are really good tires. I don't know. I think it's just a front camber thing and an 18-inch wheel thing maybe. I'm usually a 17-inch guy. The car maybe was just such a high center of gravity with the 18s that it just didn't feel very stable. So that caused me performance issues, cosmetic issues, And aesthetic issues, I really hate a wheel that like pokes out. I want them to be within the fenders, so it was kind of a mixture of a bunch of things I didn't like, which is again comes down to that's kind of how I set up the car, wide wheels, lowered it, how I lowered it. So I know people might come at me about that, but that's just one thing I was very disappointed in, and I actually have something to remedy that. I have custom camber plates here. Shout out to Brian, finally got these to me. So these go right on top of the BCs and they let you get up to like -4, which is what I need because -1.5 is not cutting it. So I'm stoked about these. This will make the car look better, perform better, and I'll be clearing my fenders finally, so I don't have to worry about messing them up. So once I fix them for good, I don't have to worry about it. Otherwise, besides those two things, pretty much, I don't really think I had any complaints about this car. It did so freaking fantastic. It's insane. I can't think of anything else that bothered me. This car did a consistent like 22 mpg, which is pretty crazy for an S52 and a heavy E34. I think that's pretty good gas mileage, so I'm not mad about that at all. The performance of it, you know, doing pulls against E36 M3 and keeping up, it feels good. It's definitely a fun car, and just a great tour. It was hard for me to even think of things that I was disappointed in, but the whole front end, everything I had issues with my fenders and stuff, was really disappointing. So now we get into something that a lot of people touched on in the very first video. They said, man, you brought way too much stuff, like so many things, and that came down to basically me just never doing a trip like this before, not realizing the stakes. You know, I didn't know if I was gonna be in the middle of nowhere and absolutely, you know, dying out there, needing to get my car fixed. And it came down to just me like not knowing how well the car was put together. Not really, I knew I put it together well, but just not really knowing, you know, what could go wrong because it's just a fresh swap. It's a driveline. I drove maybe 100 miles before I left, which is just not enough to have trust in the car. So I just wanted to have everything. So when it comes down to everything I brought here, I'm just going to really quickly go over what I wish I didn't bring, what I wish I had, what I'm glad I had. So in terms of what I'm glad I had my impact. I'm glad I had the tire pressure gauge and the inflator, which isn't here. I was already using it. The Milwaukee inflator was crucial because when that tire went bad or whatever reason, you need to be able to check your tire pressures. Anything can happen. I'm very glad I had a tire pressure thing and a gauge. And with that, I'm very glad I had a jack. Jack stands are kind of a hit or a miss. I mean, if you really think you're going to be doing a gnarly repair on the car, but otherwise, jack stands seemed like extra weight that I didn't really have to bring. I'm glad I had my socket sets, obviously. Torque wrench was kind of unnecessary. You can just crank it down with a regular breaker bar. Fire extinguisher, I'm glad I had. Oil, I'm glad I had, because these things obviously burn a little bit of oil. This car was very good about it, but there was a few times where I had to top it off. So oil is always a good thing. I regret bringing the coolant. The coolant system on this car didn't have a singular issue. That's how good it is. All replaced, and everyone talks crap about BMW coolant systems. If it's replaced with good parts, you're gonna be fine. Did not need any coolant. That was just a waste of weight. Lights of all sorts I'm glad I had, because you never know. Towels and rags and stuff, glad I had them. This lawn chair is heavy for no reason. Regret bringing it, I didn't use it once. All the other like assorted tools and stuff I'm glad I had, like the specialty tools, screwdrivers, this and that. All that is good to have. Tape, good to have. My assorted parts, good to have. Quick detailer, microfibers, very glad I had them. This little bin of spare things like math, coil packs, injectors, I'm very glad I had. Relays and stuff, fuses, all good to have. I'm glad I had it. It doesn't take up a lot of weight. Where I'm mad about things I brought is pretty much the fact that I brought all these modules, because there was just next to no reason to need, you know, a GM, an RM. Like, these can all go bad and it's not going to strand you anywhere. You can just get them shipped to you if you really want them. So, not that these are crazy weight or anything, but just extra stuff that I did not need. Brake fluid, unnecessary. Coolant hose and stuff I'm glad I had. All these fuel pumps I didn't need. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, you know. It's like, it's hindsight bias. So it's like, oh, in hindsight, the only thing I actually needed from anything I brought was tire pressure gauge, injectors, you know. So it's like, oh, I didn't need to bring anything. But I think to not bring anything would be very foolish and a poor decision. I honestly think I just overdid it with things, just because I'm the E34 parts guy, so I have all these parts, right? So it's like, why not bring an AC module, you know? But at the end of the day, stuff like that you really don't even need, and it adds a lot of weight. You know, I brought multiple socket sets, which was kind of dumb. I could have just used like one. As far as like on the trip, there wasn't many places I felt like there wasn't someone relatively nearby to help me. I guess maybe from the Midwest to out west, there, you know, a lot of long stretches, but I mean, there's service stations often. There's people that live in all the major states. So like when I was at Allen's, I changed the oil. I used pretty much all his stuff. So like bringing that big hammer, that was stupid. I didn't need a big hammer. Yeah, I don't know, stuff like that. Like I said, it's hard to decide because there's certain things that you could need, you might not need, but the car did so good to where a lot of this seemed like just dead weight, like all the wrenches, like every wrench from 8 to 22. I don't know if you really need to bring all that stuff. The direct reliability section of this video. For an SVD2 with over 180,000 miles, nearly every gasket replaced, but not the head gasket, this thing did good. Like, I mean good. These inline sixes are so solid. Do your cooling system, do the leaky things. I made it back here with not a singular leak of any such on this car. Burning oil, it hardly burned any oil. We're talking after like over 2,000 miles, you could notice a little bit down on the dipstick, but never excessive, nothing more than I'm pretty sure like the factory states, it'll burn. It is a very solid motor. No issues with anything. It pulls healthy. I couldn't be happier with how this car is. I mean, you could even probably take a car that was never even touched and it would probably make it across the country. These things are just such tanks, man. Vacuum system, you replace things that could leak vacuum, and power steering lines and stuff, and I mean it all does really good. I mean, I didn't lose a drop of coolant. This is literally at the same mark it was at when I left. I could not be happy with the reliability of this car. Like I said in my Instagram post, it was turnkey and go every day except when I noticed that leaky injector, but even that is like, if you just do your injector rebuild kit, you won't have issues. The AC system, we charged before I left, ice cold the entire way through. I was sitting in 105-degree highway traffic standstills with the AC on, and this car didn't even skip a beat once with overheating or anything like that. Not a singular issue. I couldn't be more happy with how the car was. Reliability wise, if you're scared to take a car like this across the country, I really don't think you should be. You do the most basic maintenance and it'll be very good to you, even without basic maintenance. Like, I met up with Lawrence, right? He had a 535 that he bought the day before and just sent it from Texas to Seattle. And he had a few issues here and there, but for the most part, no major maintenance, and it was perfectly fine. So you really don't have to worry much with these cars. They are really good to you, and anything that does go wrong is pretty simple to fix on the side of the road. So just a little quick snippet there. Oh, and another thing I want to talk about reliability wise is tire wear. And I know a lot of friends that road trip these cars and just drive them in general and always talk about how, oh, the tires wear so fast. Man, I gotta say, this car got in alignment, right? So the front was adjusted, rears you can't adjust, and you see the car's pretty low, not slammed or anything, but my tires look brand new all around. They hardly wore, and that's 7,000 miles. Some people say, oh, my tires last 2,000 miles on my E34s. I don't know what it is, man, but they did fantastic. Tires did not wear, so an E34 that's lowered without an alignment can make it, well, the front align, not the rear, can make it there and back and not roast through tires, which is a good thing. And now, let's get into the part that everyone's been waiting for, the costs of this trip. How much does it cost you to get your old BMW across the country in gas and all that stuff? So, like I said, I'm not going to put the build costs in. That'll be a different video. You could take your car that's totally stock and it'll probably be fine, and yeah. But now let me get out my notes here. So I marked down what I paid for gas each stop along the way. That got me basically from here and back. So I stayed in Portland and LA for a week at a time, and doing so I was driving around a lot, hanging out with friends and stuff. So I went through a lot of gas. So there was a lot of times I filled up, but it wasn't to get me to the next spot of the trip, So for you, if you're doing this trip, you might just be going straight through and all the way. So I didn't want to include those, but I did kind of guesstimate them. So in terms of the gas prices from the moment I left my house to the moment I got back, right, without intermediate stops, it was $1,168.29 total in gas. So under $1,200 in gas to get you from Illinois all the way up the northern route, down Cali and back. Not just the quickest route. I did the extended route, and it was under $1,200. And mind you, right now, as gas prices are at an all-time high. They started to come down towards the end, but like for example here, outside of San Francisco is probably the most expensive fill up. It was $94, and it was $5.60 a gallon for 91. So that was the thing about it, as expensive as I saw. PCH had $10 premium, but I obviously was smart enough to not stop on PCH. Once I got to Iowa, dude, it was $3.80 for premium. I filled up 13 gallons for $50, which was crazy. So right now, the most expensive time to ever buy gas. You know, if you were to do this trip 3 years ago, it would probably be under $800. It would probably be under $700, which is crazy to think that you could see like half the country for under $1,200 in gas. And then if you add in all my intermediate stops of messing around, it was probably about $1,600 in gas, which is still not bad for a lot of messing around and stuff. So, and then aside from that, oh, actually I had a sheet I gotta go find. Oh no, I took a picture. Next most expensive thing under gas is pretty much food. For me, like I said, lodging was different. I stayed most places for free. I stayed with my dad for a week. I stayed with friends for a week. I stayed with my family for a week. So I only had to get, I think, 6 hotel rooms. And the first 2 was shared with Eustace and Brandon, so it was like $35 each. So it was like about $100. You're basically paying between like $80 to $100 for a crappy motel. Vegas was a free stay. We had reward points, so that was different. We stayed there for 2 nights. Iowa and Utah was like $60 to $80. Outside San Fran was one of the most expensive. That was like $140 for a really poor motel. That sucked. A really crappy condition motel. So I paid probably about maybe like $400 max in like hotels and stuff. Probably less, but again, that's me getting a lot of free stays. It might be different, or you can sleep in your car. I didn't really want to do that. It's hard to get comfortable in an E34, I will say. I went into the trip thinking I could sleep in my car, but you don't really want to do that in this car. It's not fun. But then after that, it was basically just food that killed me. Now, depending on if you want to eat fast food the whole time or get some good food, you know, if you're taking your girl out in Portland for a week, it's going to get expensive. So again, my price ranges are way different than what yours might be. But for me, between gas, food, lodging, I spent about $3,200 on this trip total, which is not bad for 5 weeks of fun. $3,200 is not horrible at all. That's about, I would say that's probably about what I allotted for the trip and kind of expected it to be around that mark. But just food, you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 3 times a day. I kind of cut out breakfast for most parts. I would just do lunch and dinner, you know, hanging out with friends, getting snacks, stuff like that. It really adds up. And yeah, so not too bad, but I didn't like prep any meals to bring. I didn't bring like sandwiches or anything like that. So I did spend a lot of money eating and stuff. $3,200 to do this trip and about $1,200 in gas. And you can get yourself across the country in an old BMW. The gas mileage, like I said, 22 mpg is really not bad at all. An 18-gallon tank, so I was filling up I had about a 400-ish mile range. Most of the time I didn't go all the way to 400, but 400-mile range is not too bad. So it was a fantastic trip, man. $3 grand for the fun and the times I had. Cannot complain at all. I would recommend this to anyone out there that, you know, wants to do this in an old BMW. I think it's a very special experience, and doing it in a modern car, an SUV, a truck, doesn't do it for me, man. You know, I've done a lot of picking up of these cars where you're driving the truck for long periods of time, and it gets tiring. You know, 5 hours in a truck or a boring modern car, and you're like, man, this thing, especially once you get out west and the scenery is cool, I'm doing 10-hour stretches like it's 2 hours out here. Midwest makes everything slower because the driving is so boring because there's nothing to see. But out there, dude, like from Montana to Portland, from Portland to California, man, you're in Utah, you're like, it's like cloud 9. It's so beautiful. So it really makes the drive go by quick. So it was a great trip. Thank you guys so much to everyone that followed along with me, watched me build the car to get to that point. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. It was tiring getting all the footage and editing and stuff because I was just too busy having fun, but yeah. So I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone that's been here thus far and enjoyed this series. I hope this video teaches you or motivates you guys to want to do a trip like this. It's not too bad. These cars are reliable. The cost isn't insane. So it's a very doable trip, I think, to the average person. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and the series. And I'll see you guys in the next one. We got a lot of work to get started on all the other cars. So stay tuned. Peace.